There are a few new faces here, and we're delighted to have you. And the first thing we try to sell you is a membership. And the membership in the society is $5 a year, $10 for a family, and $100 for, wait, $10, yeah, for a family, and $100 for a life membership. And, pardon?
For one person, not a family.
Yeah, one person for a life. And that has not been raised since the society was started. So it is the best bargain in the county. The other thing we have are some things to sell. We have a cat's meow of the school. We have a history of the school and the area called the Rieco.
Please.
So those are here.
And we're getting low on the Rieco.
And we're getting low on the Riecos, and actually we don't have a lot more cat's meows either.
So get them now?
So get them now. Get them tonight, in fact. And we also have lake maps. So if anybody wants a lake map, we have the big blue ones and we have a smaller tan one. The book group will be meeting next Wednesday on the 20th, and I don't have my schedule. But in any case, if you have any questions, I think Lauren's in charge.
No, Lauren's not.
Oh, Lauren's over here.
Lauren just wants to say that welcome. And
Thanks for the water.
you're welcome. It's a pleasure.
And that's on July 20th.
The book.
The book group.
Yes. The book group is on the 20th. It's called A Man Called Ove, O-V-E, by Frederick Bachman. It's at 7 o'clock. It is all the book groups this year are being led by members. And the first one was a book about Harriet Tubman. We had a good turnout and we had a wonderful discussion. The other thing I wanted to tell you about is that we're having a summer arts program that is sponsored by the Glen Haven Historical Society, and it's for children that go to the Scott Recreation Department program, as well as anybody's children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, anybody. My neighbor across the street might bring her granddaughter next week. I want to acknowledge the fact that our own Alice Anderson, for the last 2 days, has done, no, well, it's true, magnificent programs. Yesterday she did a program that the kids, when the children say thank you with such enthusiasm, first of all, they're the most well-behaved kids you've ever seen, but with true thank you, without being coaxed, that's saying something. And they loved it. And that was the Iris paper folding, and Alice did a wonderful lesson about the flag and respect for the flag, etc. Today she did a wonderful program, thank you Chip for getting the projector, about the national parks. Next week, Carol Payton is going to, and Carol Payton volunteered to help the past couple of days as well. Carol Payton is doing something about painting on glass. Some of us might call some of them wine glasses, but we don't say that to the children. But they love it. And then there's another, I don't know what's happening next Tuesday, what the lesson's going to be. We're going to do a little bit of an intro for tennis, very little intro for tennis, but nevertheless. And that's going to happen at the Scott Park. These papers are all out here for anybody who wants them. And something with planting. And if somebody else would like to volunteer, we do have an open date. Diane, thank you for volunteering yesterday as well. Who did I forget? Did I forget somebody? Okay.
Thank you, Lauren. And
Oh,
thank
yes.
you, Alice.
Yes.
It's all volunteers, and it's free. My favorite four-letter effort. So there you go. Thank you.
Okay. Also, if you don't go to the book group, Ken Blanchard is speaking at Cornell on the 20th, and that's free. So if you want more details about that, see me. And he's talking about refiring. Let's see. Make the rest of your life the best of your life. And the annual meeting and picnic will be on August 21st, and Nancy Snedeker, who was here last time, but Nancy was the archivist at Hyde Park, and she will do a portrayal of Eleanor Roosevelt and give a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt, and she became the unofficial photographer while she was archivist, and she will talk about some of the very famous people that she met presidents included, and the interesting stories that she has about them. In any case, I think that's about it. How many have never been here before? Okay. Again, welcome. The school was built in 1901, summer of 1901. It was designed by Eric Kensett Rossiter. Rossiter was a graduate of the Cornell class of 1875, one of the first architects Cornell graduated. His father was a very famous painter, Thomas Pritchard Rossiter. And interestingly enough, like Sue's great uncle, there was the first exhibit of Thomas Rossiter's paintings in about 150 years, and it was just done this summer. So anyway, one day we'll have a program about Eric, because he's a very interesting person. But tonight, we're not going to talk about Eric. Michael F. Woodford is Vice President of Woodford Brothers Incorporated and the Treasurer of the National Barn Alliance. Mike began working for Woodford Brothers during his high school summers, and with the exception of 5 years in the early 1990s, during which he developed and operated his own company, M.F. Woodford Restoration, he's been associated with the company. In 1995, he and his brother purchased Woodford Brothers from their two uncles. Mike, as Vice President, is now responsible for customer relations and sales and marketing, and he shares responsibility for the general direction and management of the company. Woodford Brothers now serves customers from Maine to Minnesota to Virginia. Now, did people read the Cornell Standard article? Anybody read the Cornell? Okay. I quoted Sam Rayburn, and the Woodfords haven't heard this, but Speaker of the House Sam Rayburn once said, "Any jackass can kick a barn down, but it takes a good carpenter to build one." And I would add, or save one. Long the symbol of agrarian life in this country, old wooden barns are quickly vanishing from the American landscape. Mike is an acknowledged expert on how these magnificent structures can be preserved. His talk will include before and after illustrations of some of the, how many buildings do you think the Woodford Brothers in 50 years have saved? Not just barns, but structures.
A couple of hundred.
50,000 structures. Mike Woodford, preserving heritage through barn renovation.
All right.
Thank you. So thank you all for the opportunity and the great turnout. It's always encouraging to show up to one of these things and have a room full of people. I've traveled around the country for the last 20 years doing similar presentations. Actually, the same presentation, but I keep tweaking a little bit. So I've gotten to know the material, but I know it'll be new to most of you folks, and hopefully you'll find it enjoyable. I do like to talk about history, and I guess it's appropriate that we talk about my history a little bit. Woodford Brothers was started by my dad in 1965. Him and his three brothers were all got together and started the company. Their name was Dick, Tom, Art, and Harry. And my Uncle Art coined a phrase back in the day that any Tom, Dick, or Harry could build you a barn, but usually at Woodford Brothers it's a work of art. So that's it for the point to say. Although I'm sure I'll throw a couple more in. We've come to realize that the barns are going away and nobody's building new ones, or there's nobody really building new ones on any large scale. So as they disappear, our market is going away. And the reality is that I think somewhere 20 years from now, my kids are going to be working on, a barn now and then, hopefully. And the reality probably will be that they'll work on very few of them. So we've come to understand that, and understand that, you either have to adapt or perish, which we would do if we just thought we were going to work on barns forever after they're going away. So we've started getting into a few other things. We kind of recognize the situation and ask ourselves, what is it, we really enjoy doing, and we enjoy fixing buildings. That's what we've done for my whole life. So we're fixing other buildings in other ways. And really, we've gotten to the point now where we're not proud. We'll work on any building. We would have 20 years ago anyways, but now there's a concerted effort to to branch out and do other things. So we're doing a lot of residential stuff, fixing basement walls, fixing commercial buildings. Our latest endeavor, we just got certified for doing radon mitigation and testing. So I brought a couple of freebies. These are like 12 bucks at Lowe's. They got our logo on them, they're kind of cool. If there's anybody here that's ever had a concern with radon and you want to test your home, you just shoot your hand up and you'll have one of these babies. And I'm just going first come, first serve, I see. Anybody else? There you go.
Thank you.
What you invented, those should have taken it.
I've got more in the truck if somebody really, really wants them. I've got a few more, so just ask me. So on with the presentation. That's the end of the commercial end of it. So we've been at this since 1965. It's easy for me to keep track of how old the company is because I was born in '65 as well. So as long as I remember how old I am, I can tell you how old the company is. This is my father. Tom is on the left. Harry next to him. Art and Uncle Dick. Uncle Dick is still getting around real well. My dad passed away in 1995. He got leukemia and died. Uncle Harry is still residing down in Florida, and Uncle Art's not doing too good. He's got Alzheimer's and he's not doing well. But here's a picture of us working up in Penn Yan, and you see the number 39. Who was a big enough football fan to know who that was. Larry Zonka from the Miami Dolphins. So, you know, I'm purely dating myself. You can do some little fact checking and find out. I think I was about 8 years old then. I remember the job we were working at was for the Vaughn farm up in Penn Yan. And it was easy for me to remember that because my kindergarten teacher was Mrs. Vaughn, and she left the school and moved to Penn Yan, and her husband, we went out there and built them a freestyle. In that day and age, we were building pole buildings, primarily. So there's two good reasons for this picture. One of the big reasons I like it is they get to point this guy out right here. And his name is Francis Gravelding, and he worked for my dad, working on pole barns, building pole barns. And he actually talked my father into going out and working on some of the old timber frame barns. He had grown up doing that work with his dad, and just liked doing it and thought that it was something that we should consider. He talked my dad into going out and looking at a few projects, and he did. And my father, being a pretty good business person, realized that there was a market out there. This is about mid-1970s, early 70s. And we went out and did a couple of repair jobs. We called them cable jobs back then because we kind of got famous for using cable to pull buildings back together. And that work just sort of steamrolled and continued to build and got up to the point where Francis trained 3 other guys in that picture to eventually become foremen, and they taught other foremen, and we kind of built the whole company around fixing barns. One of our big venues for getting the work was the Empire Farm Days. When that used to be a roving show, we'd go to the Empire Farm Days and get about half of our leads for the year for that show. Everybody would come there and they'd come looking for us to get the barn fixed. And back then, mid-70s through the mid-80s, it wasn't a question of, you know, geez, what am I going to do with this old barn? Do I save it? Do I let it go? Back then, they were working farms. That was their livelihood. They really needed somebody to get in there, you know, and jack their barn up and straighten it up and fix it. So the business built all through those years, and we got to the point where we're doing about 200 projects every year fixing barns. And when my dad passed away, my brother and I decided to take the company over, and I kind of grew up in that barn repair end of it. And we were trying to decide what our focus would be, and we really decided to stick exclusively with the barns. Up until then, the company had done a number of things, anything from owning a gas station to a bowling alley to all kinds of stuff. They didn't really seem to want to focus on one specific thing, but I really liked the barn work, and we decided to go for that. So we geared up exclusively for that. All of our equipment that we bought, all the trucks, everything was set up to go out and do that kind of work. At one point, we even got to the point where I've got a small airplane that we used to fly crews back and forth out to the Midwest. I might lose my voice, I'm sorry. You'll have to take over if I do.
He has a cold.
probably gonna have to abbreviate a little bit to make it through this, so excuse me. This is a barn down in Green, it's out along Route 206, that a husband and wife veterinarian team bought the property. And they actually negotiated a discount on the property because the barn had to be torn down. So they got a better deal on it. Well, they called us and asked them to look at it, and we gave them a price to jack it all up and square it up, and basically redo the whole foundation at an acceptable cost, and they saved a pretty beautiful building. Most of the projects you look at, that'll be the recurring story, is that buildings that were pretty much considered basket cases, we've been able to go in and fix them up. It's not the rule, but a lot of times, people just get the cost for what it's going to be to demo the structure, and that's half of what we'll come in and actually fix the building for. So, they consider it worthwhile most of the time. This was a barn out in Ohio. It kind of sticks with me from my memory. The fellow's name was Don Baird. He remembered building the building with his dad. He was just a little guy. And in the meantime, they had struck oil on his property. And he had done pretty well for himself. And every time he drove by that barn, he felt bad about it. And he saw me at a farm show. And kind of out of lark, had me quite look at it because he didn't dream that I could fix it. And I got there and I looked the thing over. If you notice all the trees around the building, I had pretty much determined that if I cut the trees down to get a good before picture, it would fall over. The trees were holding it. So we squared it back up and got the building back straight. If you look close, you can see there's plywood that I put inside the building to strengthen it up. Kind of 2 points to be made there. That a lot of times this is all we do is the structural part of the work. Particularly in Ohio where we got to travel so far. We'll go in and get the structure squared up, leveled up and straight, secure it, and then I'll leave the roofing and siding for locals to handle. They can come in much more economically on a local basis and do the time-consuming work. The pretty part of that takes so long. And the other point to be made is that whenever you fix a structure like this, whatever forces acted on it to get it crooked has happened, and it's there, and it's kind of loose and wiggly. And if you just straighten the building back up and expect to walk away from it, it'll just go right back to where it was. You can't just straighten it up and think that it's going to stay there. So you have to do something to strengthen it up considerably with bracing or cables or additional wood bracing or something has to be engineered into the repair to expect the structure to survive. That barn was in Rockport, New York. We got a golf course. You can actually see the golf cart out there. They used to make them like that with 3 wheels. So probably a bunch of people got killed with them because it was really easy to roll those things over. Don't ask me how I know that. But that was just a typical cable job right there. That roof had spread apart at the eaves, and we'll talk more about that. But it's spreading apart at the eaves had allowed that peak to sag down. Sounds like what had happened here. So we use those cables to pull it back together, and that makes the peak go back up where it belongs.
Are the gambrel roofs harder to pull together, pull back together?
Yeah, there. I contend that most of the gambrel roofs that are out there that are built on timber frame structures were a retrofit. We all started with a single pitch, and then some enterprising individual came along and said, if we do this to your roof, you can get about 1/3 more hay capacity. And they're right. It was a pretty cheap conversion to gain that much more hay capacity. If you want to verify, you go up into the building, look at the eave plates, and most of the time you'll find a board nailed onto the top that they put the new rafters on, and you just know that they didn't occupy the same bird's nest that the rafters sat in originally, that they retrofitted it, and a lot of them are like that. Kind of the same story. This roof's, you can almost see it with this one, how that's bowed out there. And this one you can definitely see it. That's pretty easy to get the visual on. I was sitting in my father's office the day the crew went out to fix his building. And it wasn't a an odd story. It happened a lot of times that the crew would call back, or the foreman, and he'd be like, "What in God's name have you gotten me into?" My father would spend about an hour on the phone, kind of coaching him what he thought could be done to get the thing straight. And I remember him talking him through this one. He told him to put a couple of plates down through, get some posts in there, and start lifting, get cables down each side of it. Kind of hard to see in these pictures, they're not the greatest. But that's a timber they ran lengthwise to unitize the rafters. So they did that and then just kept picking and pulling and got it picked back up where it belonged. This barn, this part of the barn right here started up about here. It just fell around its foundation. And you kind of see how it crunched down onto the first floor siding. So I'll just kind of zip through these quick. It becomes apparent what we did.
Wow.
Yeah, and this guy, he was out by Buffalo. He was an architect, and he wanted to use these new styrofoam blocks that you fill with concrete, which is not so new anymore, but it was new then. And he wanted to put that under there for the foundation and turn this into an office. So I presume that's what he did eventually. This was a tornado hit this in Munnsville after the Liberty storm.
It does.
Yeah. This guy, he called us out to look at it. We got a lot of phone calls that next day, as you can well imagine. This is one time you look at our company history, you look at the financials, and it kind of goes like this, and then can't be a good storm from our perspective. But this guy hit by a tornado. This guy had no intention of fixing the barn. He had a decent policy on it, and he just wanted to buy it. So the estimator went out there and met with him, being a smart fellow. Got to talking about him. Well, in your wildest dreams, what would you have done with this building? And the guy said, well, I always wanted to put an art studio up in the mountain, because he's got $1 million view. You can see about 100 miles from his place there. And so he said, well, I'll go back to the office and I'll do some work and see if I can figure out what it would take to do that for him. So he did, and he gave him a price for it, and it cost him a few dollars to finish the project, but he had enough money to put the end of the building all back the way, to make it structurally sound and replace the end and put his art studio up in the end. Didn't pay for the entire art studio, but he paid for the loft and the windows.
Did you have to do a lot of foundation work?
Foundation was fine. And what had gotten completely ripped off was fine. Tornadoes are amazing things. I've looked at, I don't know how many buildings that are just gone, and the one next to it is sitting there, not a shingle missing. We went down to Mississippi after Katrina, and that was pretty crazy. Everything near the water within a block was just gone. I mean, there was
Except for one church.
concrete slabs in there that was the foundation, because they don't have basements down there. And then it was pretty amazing. You go one block inland, and that's where our work was, the damaged buildings that got twisted up and kind of, really racked by the winds. And then you go another block, and you have some roofing work that needed to be done, and then you go another block, nothing. Just that storm surge. It was pretty amazing to see. Well, we're aware of Mother Nature's power, but sometimes it's a little more awesome than others. I like this picture because it makes a point. Can anybody try to guess what caused that? Probably could, but no. That was a leaky windowsill.
The one at the top.
Yeah, well, it started out as a leaky windowsill, then it turned into a rotten plate, then it turned into all the studs being bad, and then the siding fell down, and the end wall collapsed, and the hole was, so it's, ultimately it was, for the sake of somebody getting up there and painting the thing originally, or replacing the board when it got bad, that would have never happened. But that's what we kind of see with these things, that kind of launches me into my mantra with old barns. If you happen to have an old barn, you really need to purpose it. You need to have a use for it, where you don't need to be out there every day. but you need to be out there once a week doing something so that you kind of remain engaged and active and see what's going on. But the old farmers back in the day, you know, when they got a leaky roof, they didn't put a bucket under it and hope for the best. They got the ladder out and they fixed it, shingle, or, you know, eventually replaced the roof. That's the story with old barns, is you have to keep that maintenance going.
Is there any truth to what the farmers say that keeping animals in the barn, the moisture keeps it,
Yeah.
lasts longer? Once it's empty, it starts to deteriorate.
Well, it's the whole moisture thing. You know, I'm not scientifically sophisticated enough to know the answer for that, but I do know that a lot of barns out there that are failing is because the basements are being pushed by frost, and that didn't happen back in the day because the animals generated enough body heat down in the basement to keep frost from occurring on the backside of those stone walls. And now with the animals not there, the frost occurs, the dirt expands a little bit, the stone gets pushed over, and then what happens? Next spring, the ground thaws out, and that ramp that comes up to the barn, the soil drops into that void just a little bit. So what happens next year? Fall comes along, you get a rain at the wrong time, that water sits in that gully that's being created. It kind of traps water there, and then it freezes and starts exacerbating the problem. So the animals being in there is ultimately, you know, the way the buildings were redesigned, they were designed for that, and without the animals, they don't do well. That, and, you know, when you get the big winds in the wintertime, all the hay in the mow had to help stabilize the structure. It just stands for the reason that it had to. That, and the big thing is the foundations get pushed around. The buildings, the bank barns, the barns that are built into a dirt bank and have a ramp that come up into them,
Yeah.
the ones that are surviving now are built on really well-graded soils or well-drained soils, so that really isn't happening to them. They're just surviving naturally without the animals, because I don't know of a barn, I should speak slowly. I'm not sure of a barn right now that there's a farmer actively milking cows in the basement of a dairy barn, or in the basement of a posted meat barn. I don't know one. I'm sure there's some Amish that are doing it, but back where I lived, there was 4 farms within a 5-minute walk that they were milking cows in the basement. And you probably all can say the same story. You know, that's just the way it was. If you lived out in the country like I did.
In response to your statement about, you know, keeping it moist and everything, if you can keep it moist, I think it won't rot. It's that action between going dry and going moist that causes the rot. And I learned that from the Niederhofer brothers.
Yeah. If you want to learn about rock, go pull a fence post out of the ground. Anybody ever done that? What do you find? What do you see? That's in the ground, that's remained stable and doesn't have oxygen, is as good as the day you drove it in the ground. It's right at grade where the moisture can get to it and they can dry out and the air gets to it. That's where they rot off, is at grade. And then above they weather and, you know, don't do as well as either. But right at grade where that moisture is the highest is where you see the most rot. So it's the same with the old barns. Like this one. This is a real typical timber frame construction. What they have is what's called a sill plate at the base of it. That sill plate sits flat on the ground, and the post comes down and sits on top of that. And that was considered a sacrificial element to the buildings. They expected, the guys who built them knew that the foundation, the masonry would wick moisture, and that sill plate would go bad eventually. Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Try it.
Is this a good one?
That is a good one.
All right, I'll take your word. I'll use anything right now.
He has a pocket full.
I got Ricola, but
Yeah,
you tell me these are better?
This will open up your nasal passages, I'll tell you that.
They got cayenne in it?
Menthol and eucalyptus.
All right. Okay, so that sill plate was considered a sacrificial element. Back in the day, every community had their barn guy that would work on the barns, and they expected periodically to have to take those sills out and replace them, and this was just part of, you know, timber frame construction. I think that's what my dad was capitalizing back in the mid-70s to, you know, mid-80s, was that the barn guys just didn't really exist anymore. There was nobody working on them, so that kind of opened the door wide open for us to go in there and capitalize on a market that was, you know, not being taken care of. This structure, oops, getting a little crazy with the wrong. This structure, the people who investigated with their town, this was up by Liverpool, and they were told that the building was too close to the property line, and if they tore it down, they couldn't put it back where it was. The zoning wouldn't allow them to. So they got all of us to come and give them a price for fixing it. The number that we gave them was basically the same as what it would have been to have replaced the structure. But when we were done, we saved all the timber frame, took all the original siding, turned it over and put it on the inside as interior siding, put the new board bed on the windows, and new metal roof. And it cost them what a new structure would have cost. But in hindsight, they couldn't have done better. They're changing it into an antique store and selling herbs out of it. So it's like the perfect building for them when they get done with it.
Oh my.
This barn was out in Lima, New York. Which, if you know where Lima is, Canandaigua area, that whole western part of the state, they get some pretty high winds out there, straight line winds. This barn was built like a normal threshing barn north to south, so it was exposed to the wind. They think it got hit by about a 90-mile-an-hour wind. They picked it right off its foundation and dropped it. But we weren't hired by the owners, the Logic Brothers. We were hired by the insurance company to come out and fix it. So we basically just picked it up, moved it back over to the foundation, rebuilt the foundation. And it's hard to see in this picture, but when we left, the cables that we used to manipulate the structure, we converted those into tie downs and tied it all down so it couldn't blow off its foundation. This barn was out by West Point. And I guess the point of this picture, that guy called me called us at like 7 o'clock in the morning, and I was out there 10 o'clock, and by 1 o'clock that afternoon, we had a crew there working on it. Because he was afraid, it was going over. That guy hit my window that night, and you can see all the boxes tumbled. That was the building, knocked all the boxes over. This is right in Portland. When I was working on a barn for the Randolph brothers. I don't know if anybody knows the Randolph brothers, but they're the last thing I was at Homer. This is just a typical old dairy barn that was not being used. They had some bigger equipment that they had there that they wanted to put inside. They were talking about building a machine shed and had me come up and look at it for converting the barn. So basically we went in there and fixed the structure that needed, took the lean-to off the side, dropped the silo, and then re-engineered the roofing system so that we could take the mount floor out. And there it is afterwards. This was a building that we worked on down in New Jersey, Homer, New Jersey. The picture, well, this picture was taken about 3 months before we started the work. When we got there, that cupola had actually dropped below the roof line. That's how fast it was kind of coming down at that point.
Can you repurpose material from silo? Can you
Sure.
do anything with it?
Well, that's a big industry now that we've just sort of taken the moral high road and not gotten into. There's a lot of guys taking barns now and putting it back up, or taking the material and using it for other things. And I should say we haven't taken the moral high ground too well, I guess. Beacon Skiff, when they built their new tasting facility up there, we built out a lot of reclaimed timber. So we didn't actually tear the barns down, but we did use lumber. And that happens. I mean, those guys are out there doing it, and they're paying people a few bucks for the building, and they go in and they sometimes do a good job, sometimes not, depending on who you're dealing with. But I've heard of horror stories where they come in and make a huge mess and don't pay what they're supposed to. That's another story for another day. But yes, certainly can. We've taken barns down and moved them and put them back together, reconfigured a little bit, basically the same, but a little bit different. And I think I've got slides in here of it, where they were taking a barn and making it into a house. So yeah, it can be done. A lot of folks go into that with a misconception that they're going to save money by using an old barn. And I'll agree that if you're going to go do all the work yourself and you're going to take the timber frame down, you're going to move it, you're going to put it back up, and then you're going to spend nights and weekends for the rest of your life finishing it. You can maybe save a few dollars. But really the structure itself, the timber frame, the skeleton, is the part that you're after. The siding and roofing and all that generally is pretty much expired its life cycle. So to think that you're going to take that stuff and put it back on the siding is kind of silly. I mean, you got a 90-year-old siding that was good for 80 years. It's not gonna make much sense to try to reuse it. This is one of the mount floors that I fell through. When you start seeing plants growing up in your hay mound, it's time to do something. But with this one, there wasn't any quick fix with it. There wasn't any throw a cable here or there and suck it back together. This was take it apart and rebuild it. Basically, the way that they built it originally, to put it back to make it original, look original. That's the stanchions downstairs of the gutters. And here's the building afterwards. This project was done for, my understanding, the inventor of the scented candle. This guy invented scented candles and started selling them through Macy's. And these were the ugliest things you've ever seen. There was nothing but a blob of wax with a wick sticking out of it. They looked terrible, but they smelled good when you burned them. So he had us do this whole renovation, and he turned us into the Americana gift shop where they were going to sell their scented candles and a bunch of other stuff. But they didn't tell us until we were done.
Where is that?
Elmer, New Jersey, about an hour out of Atlantic City. They had gotten a quote from a company to come in and remove the asbestos shingles. And the cost for removing the asbestos shingles was less than the entire project cost for us to renovate the buildings. Which I've been told by some other folks it didn't need to be that high, but that's what they told us. So it makes a good story and I'm sticking with it. These guys, the Geisman brothers, I see them every year at the farm show in Ohio. And they just walk up to my booth and they laugh and then they walk away. They talk to me and they come in here and lift it up. This is a hog farrowing building. And they talk to me and they're coming out there and they said, oh, we got cribbing, we'll do this with you. So I showed up with my guys and we spent 3 days lifting that building up 6.5 feet. And my guys were kind of grumbling because before we started, I insisted that we put these cables, which are again hard to see. I insisted that we tie the whole thing down with cables because we were basically just going to have the building sitting on cribbing in the air. And that's not safe if the wind gets blowing. And in Ohio, it gets blowing. So every time we lift the building up, we'd have to adjust the cables. Every time, so just the whole time we're running around doing all this extra work that they didn't think they needed to do. And then the third day, the wind got up to about 45, 50 miles an hour. I didn't hear a single word. They were all happily adjusting cables the whole time. But there we extended the post, basically got the structure all put back together. I stopped by a couple years later and so he had hired somebody else to come in and put the siding back together. But they turned it into a machine shed. That barn has probably made us more money than anything we've ever done. And I understand now that barn is actually gone. It's down now. But it was out in Niagara Falls, and I was always under the misconception that we had built a beam in there and jacked it up from below, which would have been my first thought. The foreman that I pointed out earlier, Francis, he straightened me out a few years ago, probably 10 years ago. He goes, you know how we did that, don't you? And I was like, not exactly. He said, yeah, I just took we have this machine called a high lift. It's basically a fork truck on steroids with about 40 feet in the air. He just stuck the tent in that window, picked it up against the wall, resecured it all, fixed the sill. And he was out of there in about 6 hours.
Yeah.
This is a big job I did out in Ohio. This is in Westerville, Ohio, which is just outside of Columbus. I think their claim to fame is the home of Prohibition. That's where it all got started. And it's still a dry town. You can't buy a beer in Westerville. But this project was, the building was listed on the National Historic Register. It was unique in a couple of ways. It had an entirely brick foundation, which is kind of odd. The guy who built the building owned a brick factory, so that all started adding up when we get the facts. But brick foundation, and then you'll see when we get to it, it was the first farm with running water on it. And I'll show you how. The project here was they were widening the road next to it, so the building had to be moved back 50 feet off the road. the first thing we had to do was get in there and fix a bunch of structural problems that existed. Here they had done the typical concrete trick. I don't know who invented this one, but it's about the worst one going. That sill plate at the mount doors rots out commonly because the doors are there and rain can get on it. So people for years have been basically putting a board on the inside of that, hacking out all the rotten wood that they can, and pouring it full of concrete, which is probably just about the worst thing you could do to the timber frame. It just traps all that moisture and makes it rot faster, so it's just not a good idea. So we had to replace the sill. There was a bunch of other structural work we had to do. Up above, I guess I kind of skipped that part. Up above where the windmill is, and I'll show you, that whole thing had rotten and was ready to fall off. So we fixed all that. These are called heavy hull skates. Up until a few years ago, when I moved a building, that was really all I could do was put it on a skate system and basically turn it into a train car for its short move. And we were kind of limited to moving in any direction. I could move it one way and then I would have to reconfigure everything and move another way if they wanted to move diagonally across the property. This one just had to go one direction, so it was good for what we needed to do. Here's the building leaving its foundation, and that's where it's heading to over here. Basically sat on that shoring for about 3 months. We didn't have the contract originally for doing all the work. We were just going to do the structural work to move the building. We got the job of doing the foundation, and the brick that the architect ordered from someplace in the state of Washington got lost and nobody knew where it was. So I had to pay for like 2 more months of shoring rental that we didn't budget for. But if anybody here's a contractor, you know how that sort of thing works. That's my fault. But here's just more pictures of it on the shoring moving. So here's the this windmill that I referred to. That windmill operated basically the same as a hand pump down in the basement. It had a stick that went down and connected to the handle, and it pumped, and it had another mechanism for pumping water up into the top of this tower. Up here was a 1,000-gallon Cypress water tank, and from that they had piped water across the farm to have running water on the property. Here's the building afterwards. We moved it back, put the whole foundation back under. We did all the structural work, we did all the structural refinement to bring it up to code so that they could use it for public use. And now it's Westerville's community center. You can rent the building for like $100 for the day. So, birthday parties, weddings, whatever you might want to use the barn for, they can use for that. And they're trying to convince the town that they can have alcohol at the wedding receptions, but they haven't done yet. They may have by now, but back, we had a national conference there about 5 years ago, and then they weren't allowing them to have alcohol at the receptions.
When was that originally built?
You want me to guess, or you want me to tell you?
Yeah.
Like 1890. I don't know exactly.
Looks more like a church.
Yeah, that's the inside of it. And a lot of barns are. Well, churches are barns, if you want to know the truth. If you go up, we're working on churches all the time. If you go up into the attic, it's essentially the same construction. You just don't see it. And they've devised ways to not put posts in them, but they're pretty much a big barn. Going back to this building now has downstairs, there's a fully operating kitchen, handicap accessible bathrooms, meeting space downstairs, a 3-story elevator that goes all the way up into the loft. The loft's accessible, and the whole barn floor is open for dancing or whatever you'd like to do. Beautiful building.
When you rebuild these things, remodel them or restore them, do you have to provide engineering drawings to the local code people?
On that project I did, I had to give them my structural analysis of the building and basically prove that my shoring could carry the building, but that's as far as it went. They had architects on staff that were retained to design the work and to do the engineering. They didn't know what they're doing. They had never done a historic renovation. the things that they did as structural enhancements to the building were just kind of silly. They had us cut all the floor joists off, 1 inch back from the floor beams, put a steel plate on the floor beam, well, jack it up, put a steel plate on the floor beam, through bolt all that, and then re-weld hangers on to reconnect the joists to these floor beams. In the building that's been carrying, you know, been full of hay its whole life. And now they're gonna put a few people in there and think that it wouldn't take the weight. You know, it's, I guess anybody can pick on anybody if you want to, but in some regard, we were thinking that they're trying to justify their bills, but they had to do something, so they're just, you know, coming up with some stuff to do. This was a building that was built in the 20s, 30s. I'm trying to get this straight. In the 30s, as part of a works project, it was out at the Saratoga National Park. Prior to being a national park, it was just a park, and when the national government took it over, they had a rule that said that if the structure wasn't part of the historic event, that it couldn't remain on the site. Because this was built from barns that were at the Saratoga battlefield and made them look like a little fortress in the 30s, it wasn't a historically appropriate building, so they were just gonna tear it down. Some local folks thought that was kind of a shame, so they hired a guy, a local mover, to pick it up and move it about 1.5 miles and put it on this property that they had. And it sat there for about 35, 40 years, just dormant, doing nothing. So they eventually had enough bank sales that they got enough money to move the building into a park down in Stillwater, town of Stillwater. But the problem was they had to go about 6 miles, and in the meantime, with all the cable lines and everything that had been strung, it was prohibitive to take the building down the road. It was too tall. The rule of thumb, if you're moving a building, every time you run into a wire, it's $1,000. So if you drive from here to where you want the building to go and count how many wires there are, just multiply by 1,000, and that was about 12 years ago, so it's probably a little more now. So they hired us to come in and basically take apart about 3 feet of the base of the structure, take it apart and lumber it, move it, and then take the roofing system off it to get it down short enough so that we could work with a company out of, I'm going to get this wrong, but they're out by Saratoga, Lerman Movers, and they put their dollies under it and drove it the 6 miles into town and put it on the foundation. I was about 3 weeks on this project with about 4 guys. And I'm doing the math. And we charged him 20 grand. And he backed in there and moved the building in about a day and a half. We charged him 20 grand. So I think somebody did better than somebody else. But I really enjoy working on it. So sometimes you have to suck it up, I guess. But here we've got it down in the park. The foundation's put back together, and we're reassembling the roofing system.
And do you number all that stuff when you take it?
Yeah. Yep. The only thing that got replaced was this portion of the siding was just paper thin. When we took it apart, it was just falling apart. So that got put back new. Then the cedar roofing got put back new. And they stained it. We weren't responsible for that, but if you drive by it now, you can hardly see that there's a color difference. But when they finished it, at that point, it was like, oh, that's a good one. Kind of neat building. This was last week we finished down in Washingtonville, which is about 10 minutes from West Point. This is a carriage house next to the Moffett Library. And I didn't get into the local history. I asked everybody I talked to on site, you know, what's the history of Washingtonville, what's the history of the library, and they're like, we don't know, we're contractors, we don't care. We don't care. But our job was to come in and move the building. It had to go, here it had to go kind of in an S shape. An S, no, it's more like an S turn into me. So for moving this building and leaving as much of the exterior intact as we could, we essentially built a trailer frame out of steel I-beams inside the building so that the dollies and the whole moving system all stayed inside of the structure. And here we are basically just taking my I-beams and you put an I-beam, place it, mark it, drill holes, bolt it together. So we built the trailer frame inside the structure. And here it is getting driven up onto the foundation. That skid steer that we had there got placed inside in the middle of the frame that we built, and we used it to drive it. And the contractor that we were working for, the general, his responsibility was to make an even grade from the site to the proposed site so that we could drive it over there just on a straight incline. He built kind of a swale in the middle of it. Then one of my dollies I had to do with the building didn't want to move anymore. So we had to reconfigure some things in the middle of it. We got it there. And he came over with his big excavator, gave us a little push to get us up on the foundation because my machine just wasn't going in. This barn, I'll be honest with you, I don't know where it is. I can tell you what we did. We fixed it. I believe it's down by Cooperstown. This job is out in western Ohio. And the story that goes along with this one is that there was so much sheep manure in the basement. The guy asked if we should clean it out before we got there. And the posts in the basement were almost over a 45-degree angle. And I was like, no, you better not clean it out, because if you do, I think the building's gonna fall over. So he did, we got there, and our job one was to brace the building up and secure it, and then clean the manure out. Here we did a pressure-treated foundation. When you get into these things and start, considering what you're gonna do and how you're gonna do it, there's always varying levels of quality and cost, and for some reason it seems like the higher the quality, the higher the cost is, usually. But about the lowest quality and the cheapest way to fix a building like this would be to put a pressure treated foundation under it. They just go in real quick and it's economical and cheap. And the guy didn't really have a purpose for the building. He just wanted to save it, just really wanted to save it, and he wanted to save it as cheap as possible, which kind of falls into another thing that we talk about. We do some National Historic Register work. I would say that on average, we're doing about 5% of our work is what would be considered a historic restoration, where the building's being put back with like kind of quality to meet the Secretary of Interior standards for historic rehabilitation. The other 95% is something else that we're normally working for kind of an everyday person that's got the building, they want to fix it. They may not go for the pressure treated, they may go a few extra bucks to go to a block wall, or the next step up to put a poured block wall in, or the next step up to go to a poured foundation. And, so there's all these levels. Then obviously the most expensive and probably still the best would be to relay the stone wall like original with a proper drainage system around it. That's all debatable, and I can assure you though that to put the stone walls back the way they were built originally is going to cost a little. But sure do look nice. That's just another shot of that building. And here's, if you didn't believe me about the manure, sometimes I have pictures to back up what I say. That was pretty bad. You remember that one? This is inside of the Randolph farm. I got this little sequence, but that's a system we call sling cables, where we take the weight of those interior posts and transfer them to E-plates. Well, I've probably done that to about 100 buildings that we went in and opened up for equipment storage. This is an example of another repair that by no means is a historically correct repair. That's taking a rotted E-plate, which is probably about the hardest thing to work on in an old barn, and going in there and reinforcing it and the rafters to keep the roof supported and the building from coming down. I think you could use the word crude. It's pretty close to crude. But the building, when you drive by it on the road, you're never going to know the difference. Mm-hmm. I mean, it looks fine from outside. If you walk inside, and you'll see that that's what's been done. And it's a matter of money. I decided a long time ago that, these are private property and people have the right to decide what they want to do to their own property. If they want to do a historic repair and want to pay for it, I'm not gonna talk them out of it. As long as the check clears, we'll do it. Yes, sir.
When you're replacing a rotted sill plate, you're talking about a beam probably 10 inches square, aren't you?
Yeah.
How do you have to jack up the building?
Yeah.
Where do you, what do you attach to the building that you put the jack on so the whole side comes up at once to replace the sill?
What's that old commercial where they bring the laundry into the Chinese laundry and it's ancient Chinese secret, huh? I can tell you, but then, right here, this is what's called a tie beam. And I don't know if you guys all want me to bore you with timber frame terminology, but what the tie beam does is its function is here's the walls of the building. The tie beam goes from one side to the other, and its name describes it. It ties the building together so that it can't spread apart. Here you've got the roof. It's sitting there, and gravity's pushing down on it, right? Watch my elbows as gravity wins. Where'd they go? They went out, right? So the tie beam ties it together so it can't go out. Right? That configuration is incredibly strong. Who said any jackass can take a barn down? Sam Raven. Well, he might be right, but you got to kick a long time to knock it down. Timber frame buildings are built incredibly strong. I've jacked on one corner of a building and half of the whole building went up. That's how rigidly they're built. They're amazing structures. So when, my joke is, if the farmer's wife's out there bothering you, just get the camera out and start taking pictures and she'll run for the house. And if the farmer's hanging around bothering you, just start jacking and the first time the barn creaks, he runs for the house. But we've learned through the years that they'll do a lot of creaking before anything bad's gonna happen. And they're just incredibly strong structures. So with that said, we'll come in and we'll set a post on something stable down below, put generally a 20-ton bottle jack on top of that, under this tie beam, put a steel plate on top of it so that the jack doesn't plunge into the wood and try to hit you in the face and give you new teeth. Don't ask how I know that. And just by doing that, you'll pick up on that tie beam right there, that upright, and the whole building will go up at that location, and that allows you to get in there and work on that sill plate. So that was worth the price of admission right there, huh?
There you go.
I'm gonna try it tomorrow.
Have you ever had a
We
building?
give free estimates.
Have you ever had a building that you were doing that and something terrible happened?
Yep.
You notice those nice teeth he has?
Actually, this seems to be the way it works. I was doing this job for this guy in Ohio, and the job was all done. The guy, his name was Doug Ratz. And I'm usually terrible with names, but somehow certain ones just stay in my head. And I'm all done with the job, and we're loading up the truck, and he says, "Hey, I got this one piece of floor over here that I'd like you to try to pick up for me." I was like, "Sure, we'll do that." So I took this thing, these Kevlar airbags that the rescue teams use for the fire departments for picking up cars that have rolled over and stuff. And I put this thing under this beam. It was a perfectly good beam, and I'm jacking on it, and it's just really heavy, and it's not going good. So I'm probably forcing it a little harder than I should, and the end of that beam broke off. I don't know where the beam went, but the bag came up, hit me in the face, and knocked out three of my teeth. And I got to continue for 10 days in Ohio with 3 broken teeth. I was living on milkshakes. And that wasn't fun either. Until I got home and got to the dentist. But yeah, that didn't go so well. And I did another one over in Cooperstown where typically we'll try and work on the worst part of the building first. And the theory is you never take a step backwards when you're working on a structure. Everything you do should make it stronger. That's the theory. So that you're never taking a step backwards or making something less stable than it was when you showed up. The first thing you do makes it a little better, and then the next thing you do makes it a little better, and progressively the building just keeps getting better. So we started on this carriage barn in Cooperstown, and I had assessed the building, and I determined that the right side was the worst, so I was going to start working on it. And there was a wood floor in the building, so we couldn't see all of it. And we got the right side jacked up, and things were going great. And all of a sudden, the whole building came down. And the guy that was, I think I could have saved it if my other 2 guys didn't run. I was like, oh, and they're gone. I was like, I was on my own and it didn't work. But we found out after we took the floor out on the other side that the whole sill was gone on the other side except for one point in the middle. So I had to set myself up for that happened. And I don't know if I'd have done anything different the next time, just on a day-to-day basis. It's what I was doing what I thought I should be doing. So the work is not secretarial work. It can be a little dangerous. We haven't had anybody killed. I can't say that we've never got anybody hurt. This is a little garage down in Oneonta, and it's here to serve a couple of points. One is the old no job too small. That's about as small as it gets there. And here's another good illustration of once you push the building back over straight and get it where you want it, you got to do something to hold it there. And these buildings that are built like this, a lot of garages, in cities are built like this, and they just have no diagonal bracing in them. They're built without any bracing. So after we get done straightening the building out, we have to devise ways to hold them there. Gusset plates are a good way to hold these, which is what we call these plywood triangles. This one was down in Corning. I don't know why I like this picture. I just do. I like the speed square hanging over there. I don't know who did that, but I thought that was kind of cool. Just a block wall that was failing. We went in and jacked it up and framed it and put siding back on it. And that we did in one day. Kind of a job.
Looks like to me that was your plumb line.
What's that? Some,
Yeah,
the
plumb
plumb
bob.
bob? Yeah. A little unorthodox plumb bob. I mean, it wasn't there before, so it was one of my guys did it. I've always wondered why. This is the good illustration of why you shouldn't drink and do construction work. No, just kidding. This was Labor Day damage. A tree came over, and hit this building, and just folded it. And it was another good example of what everybody thought was a basket case. We put together pretty reasonably. This is, 5 years ago, I could remember where this was. Skahari, just a rotten sill plate in a garage, jacked it up. Here we did a thing that we called sistering the studs. These studs had all rotted up into the wall. So a sister is to go up high enough on the stud and cut it square where it's still solid. Then replace the sill down below after you get the building jacked up, and then put a stud directly under the one that's there, and now another one right beside it to kind of lock it there and hold it, and that's called a sister. And that's what we did on this. You can see the two studs for each. This is our shop in Apulia Station. This was an old railroad dock or landing on the side of this building where they received or shipped cans of milk out, and when they tore the loading dock off, they didn't help the wall any. So we patched that up and then did a process called shotcrete, which we're doing a ton of now. It's where you spray concrete onto a wall to restore it.
Great.
Two names, shotcrete or gunite are the synonymous terms. They're a little bit different, but they're basically the same thing. Spray concrete through a nozzle, and whatever the chemical process is, when the concrete hits the wall with such force, it makes it denser and more structurally better than just placing concrete loose.
Did you have to put rebar on it?
We didn't on that one. We do on a number of projects. This one we didn't. If this was, I'm currently in the final stages of bidding a project for the Cuyahoga National Park for the federal government out in Ohio, yeah. What's that?
My brother lives in that town.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a pretty spot. Now that they got the river cleaned up. I think that's the story of the burning river.
Yep, that's
right. There we'll have to do a bunch of rebar work within the wall to then do the shotcrete process to fix a wall that's not as bad as this one really, but they've got a little higher standards.
How thick was that spray coat?
How thick could you go with it?
Well,
You can go about 5 or 6 inches on one shot, but you can layer it. This was how a lot of swimming pools were built back in the day. Up to Rosamond Gifford Zoo in Syracuse, they're building an elephant pool. I don't know if anybody knows about that. They're using this process to build the elephant pool. It'll be a shotcrete or a gunite pool. It works real well. It's just it's a little expensive. Here's a wall that was failing. We actually got kind of an action photo of it coming down with a little help from the excavator. You can see we've got it supported back here. And then this is just kind of quick showing the process here. We poured a new footer, formed up and poured a new wall, and then restored the bank. And there's the pour wall from the inside. This was, this project was for Bill Casey. I don't know if anybody knows Bill. He's real active in the Fabius Historic group. This was actually money from the New York State Barn Grant program. He got a grant for doing this, and this was one of about 30 projects that we worked on for the state. I won't talk about that. I can't help myself. I was told that after the program ended, that almost half of the money was given back. That people, once they found out the strings attached, that they were selected for the grant and didn't even take the money. They didn't realize they had to pay income tax on it and then all the other things they had to do. By the time they get in there, they're like, oh, okay, forget it. I include this barn because this barn is probably the most advertised barn that we have. This one ran for 20 years in the Country Folks newspaper as the leading barn, straight barn. And I didn't even know it was possible back in the day, but my father had gone in and shaded out all these trees to make that a better before and after. And I'm looking at it and I'm going, that's the barn from Country Folks, but there was no trees. I was told afterwards that he spent like an afternoon doctoring those pictures up. So truth in advertising, right? Don't believe everything you see in the newspaper. I mean, it's the actual building, the actual lead, but he did doctor the picture with the trees out of the way. This one is I call this a life lesson. I drove all the way up to St. Louis, Missouri. So we actually do go a little further than Minnesota. Missouri's just a little bit further. But I get there and this guy had me out to look at this barn. This barn's a wreck. I mean, it's just, there wasn't much good to say about it. Foundation was decent. But I get there and a few minutes early, I see this guy coming up the driveway and he's just a great big guy. And he's got the whole Harley thing going on with a vest, and I'm like, oh my god, I just drove 6 hours for something. Because this guy's not going to fix his barn. He doesn't care about barns. So I go through the whole thing and figure what it needs, and I give him a quote. And I tell him it's going to be like 50 grand to fix the barn all up, put a new roof on it, and you'd have to get somebody to fix the siding. And he's like, well, do you want me to write you a check now or when you're done? And I was like, you can pay us when we're done. That's how we work. So, don't judge, right? But I guess I kind of zipped through these. I mean, this barn was bad, and it needed a lot of work.
how long did that take you?
Guys, about took like 3 weeks.
What kind of wood do you use for that timber frame?
That was laminated SPF. He just wanted to, make it structurally sound. That's a barn that we opened up in Baldwinsville for the Reeves farm. They have a big vegetable operation up there. I seem to have included the barns that I fell through the mouths on. I fell through this one too. It's like I'm going to get something back out of them, I thought I really hurt myself on this one though. I was standing up on a side girt, measuring from eave to eave to get the steel exactly right. So I'm standing right here. And I lost my balance, and I only had to jump down about 4 feet, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But where I jumped onto, whenever you jump into a loose mile floor that you're not familiar with, you're always kind of like, oh boy, here we go. Because you just don't know what the floor is under you. And on that one, they had all these trap doors that you had, these little thumb latches you press. And the trap door dropped down, and that's how they got the hay down for the cows. Well, I hit one of those, and that thumb latch decided to let me go. And I went through, and as I went through it, I hit my head on the mall floor and wound up down in the basement. And the guy that was holding the other end of the tape was like getting mad at me. He's like, "Where did you go?" And I'm down there trying to wake up. When I woke up and I did, I was paralyzed from about here down. I couldn't move anything. And I sat there for about long enough to get scared. And I've talked to an orthopedic surgeon since then, and he said it happens in football one time. You get a stinger where you be paralyzed for a moment, and then it was sort of, everything just sort of tingled and came back. And I got up, walked away. I ran a marathon a week later, so I guess I was all right. Here's a barn where we basically did some jacking and got the structure straightened out, but the reason I just put this in there is on almost all of these projects, we're devising drainage systems in conjunction with the work that we're doing. One of the big issues that you deal with is, water laying up against these buildings and the foundations and deteriorating them. So we're always trying to manage the water around these structures. And that one, the before and after just doesn't do it justice. That thing was a basket case. And we had to look pretty sharp. This was a timber that we actually replaced to replicate all the mortise and tenon joinery. Here we're taking out the bad part. And there we're rebuilding the timber to go back in place. And retrofitting the floor beam to get fitted back together. And here it is all going back together. Kind of gives you a bit of a sense of the amount of work that it takes to put that one timber back there. If we did the typical lamination hack job, I'd be in and out in about 5 hours. I mean, that's how long it would take me and a couple of guys to structurally replace that bad part of the beam. To put that timber back in like we did, it took about 3 days. It's just that much more work and that much more precise.
How do you get the tenons tucked in that come in from either side?
Well, we had to spread them out, and as the timber came into place them and bring everything together. Yeah, and that's the way they put the barns up originally. They had to make that stuff come together as you built it. We've mentioned my affiliation with the National Barn Alliance. We actually have 2 timber frames that are scale size. They're quarter scale, and we take them around the country to schools and to fairs and whatever venue we can get a group of people at. And we'll typically use 10 to 12-year-old kids to do a barn raising, where they'll take all the pieces parts and put them together. And it's pretty cool. I mean, the kids really enjoy it. And most of the venues that I've been to have been inner city school kids that have never even seen a barn or have a vague idea of what a barn is and what it's for. So it's a pretty neat educational tool. And there's also a curriculum that comes along with it that the teachers can use. This barn won an award from the New York State Barn Coalition that we fixed up in the Adirondacks. This barn. This one was down in Virginia. I don't know why I included that one. It's a typical cable job. We pulled it back together. This job was up by a Tisco Lake, and things were getting kind of serious. That tie beam had fallen from there down to there. We went in and picked it up, put it back together. Guess I'm showing a little diversity here. This is our design for a salt storage structure that we built in Pompey. And then I guess I'm kind of going off script a little bit. I'll just zip through these pictures. This is our office in Apulia. Regrettably, we're finishing restoring our railroad depot that we own there. We're turning it into office space as well. And I don't have any good slides of it. Well, when you have me back next year, I'll have good slides. Yeah. This is a camp down in Oneonta that we put a second floor on. This house here needed a pitched roof put over it, so we did that. This is up in Horseshoe Island, up by Clay. This was actually a FEMA project. It was in a floodplain. We went in and lifted it up. We lifted it up. Huh. Somehow I took the foundation pictures out. We lifted up 8 feet, put a full foundation under it, and apparently I omitted those pictures. This is, anybody know the Zogs from Portland? Where the auction house was?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Richard's house. I did the sills on that. This was up in, near Fadius. We used to do vinyl siding, really don't this much anymore. This was Cassane water conditioning up on Burnett in Syracuse. Have a whole house makeover there. This is my insurance guy, his back entrance. They had an ordinance that you couldn't have a flat roof that pitches to a door, so they could go change the pitch of it, so you'd be okay. This is a good illustration of what I was talking about. This is the tie beam and its connection to the upright in an old barn. And I call these the Achilles heel of timber frame construction. What happens is you get a big snow load on the roof or a heavy enough wind or something, and these pins, where this joint will actually fail in one of three ways. One is the pins shear off inside their housings so that that joint can start coming apart. Or in the industry we call it the relish, the end of that tenon pops off so that it can start coming apart. Or the upright starts to split in half so that the part that's connected to the tie beam starts to pull away. So that's pretty much the three typical ways that a barn starts to come apart at that connection. And for years we've been going down to New York City and picking up a tractor trailer load of elevator rope, which is used elevator cable. They have to replace it for safety standards just regularly. There's really nothing wrong with it. They just have to replace it for their standards. So we go down and we buy the used rope, and we call it our pre-oiled, pre-stretched, and pre-tensioned elevator cable. And it works great for this. It's extremely strong, and we've pulled a lot of buildings back together with it. But that's it in failure. Here you can kind of see what the building looks like and how that tie beam goes from side to side. Here's the cable wrapped around the eave plate. The way we do that is we start on one side or the other. I typically want to work on the side that's got the problem so I can be right next to it and watch it. But we'll take that cable and we'll wrap it around the eave plate on this side, put it through a couple cable clamps and lock it so that cable is fixed on the side that's doing better. And then we'll go to the side where the building's coming apart. Then I'll take that cable and I'll wrap it around and put it through the clamps loose. Don't tighten the clamps. And then hook the come along with these things called grippers. And if you're working on my crew and I tell you it would be a couple of pork chops, those are grippers. They look like pork chops. But then we hook this is a 3-ton come along, hook to the grippers. One's hooked to the side that's feeding in, one's hooked to the tail that's coming out. When I pull on that, the cables get fed towards the beam and around the underside of the beam. So it's multiplying my advantage. I have a 3-ton come along, and having done that with one return, I can get 6 tons of pulling force. And that is typically enough to pick up a barn roof, that right there. We'll do that at each one of these bents, they're called. That frame is a bent. The space in between it is considered a bay. And if we put those cables in line with each bent, crank on them, we can fix the typical roof. I've had jobs where we've had to put additional cables in just to multiply power. If you remember the book Gulliver's Travel, they just kept adding more strings until they couldn't get up. Well, that's kind of that way with timber frame construction. If you need a little more power, just put another cable in. There's the joint now having been closed. And here, that's how we'll lift a lot of the buildings where we're at. That right there, you jack on that, this will pick this whole affair right up and take the weight off the bottom of that post. Here, what I was doing is I was trying to wiggle that joint up and down so as I manipulated the cable, it would close. There's a lot of tension built up in there, and you kind of got to wiggle things around a little bit to get them to go back together. But that's what we were doing with Jay. This was over in New Woodstock. This was 3 years ago when we just kept getting snow after snow. And this is worst case scenario for a building. You'd get a snow load, it'd warm up a little bit, it'd kind of sag down but never thaw out and come off. And then you'd get another snow, it warmed up a little bit. So when we started shoveling that roof, there was just layer after layer of dense packed snow and everything that you know, it almost turned into ice. And it just got heavy enough to the point where it just came right off the block walls that supported it, and down it came. This was up about here. And you can see all the debris, that roof is just smashed. So we took the roof all off, and then there again, basically framed it back the way it was built originally. And then put the roof back on it. This farm's in Seymour, Wisconsin, which I didn't know that there was a controversy, but apparently Seymour, Wisconsin and Hamburg, New York have tried to lay claim to the original hamburger having been made. And I elected to not get in the fray. Let them fight it out. But this guy, Terry Lasky, owned this barn, and he did this thing that we call a ballpark kit. We have this thing on our website where they can go on and I basically give them instructions as to how to go out and measure their building and take pictures of it and kind of tell them, you know, to get angles from these different perspectives and send us that. And I can sit in my office, look at your building any place in the world and give you a ballpark what it would be to come fix it. So we did that process with them. I gave them the quote over the phone for what it would be. And then we basically tell those folks that if that budget is workable for you, we'll travel to wherever you are and come out and give you an actual estimate where I walk through and verify everything that I saw from the pictures, because everybody knows you don't buy a building from a picture, right? You know, because there could be things that are just, you know, worse than you thought. So we got out there, we looked it over and gave him the price for the actual work, which was within budget, and he hired us to come do it. Our guys spent a whole winter out there restoring that timber frame. It was, you can see when things start getting round on a barn, you know, they're sort of sagging and melting into the building. It's pretty bad.
How much would that have cost, that one to start?
All said and done, I think we had about 150,000 in it. That was an authentic restoration. Well, I say authentic. The mouth floor, from the mouth floor down, was all new timber or new lumber construction, laminated and such to rebuild the flooring system. And then everything above that was built as original. We replaced all the bad timber frame components with like kind of quality. I don't know what Terry Lasky did for a living, but must have been doing it right, because he didn't bat an eye. He thought that was great that we would do it for that.
Metal roof?
What's that?
Is that a metal roof?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, aren't they a little more expensive than, you know, just regular fiberglass shingles?
We've been doing metal roofing for years, and for whatever reason, just the way that we're structured, our overhead is such that if we can minimize labor costs, we do better price-wise. So the metal goes on so fast that we're more competitive with metal roofing than we are with shingles. This is a standing seam metal roof, and that's what he wanted, and that's what he got. So I mean, it was basically the whole foundation got donated, the floor, the entire floor got rebuilt. About a third of the timber frame structure had to be rebuilt. Not quite half the rafters had to be redone, the roof boards, new metal roof, new siding. It was a lot of work. He's turned this into his family living history museum. He's got all of the old equipment stuff he saved. It's all on display up in the mound. And every year he sends us a calendar with, and the barn is always made prominent somehow in the calendar, but it goes through across the farmstead, and it's all nature shots from the farm and pictures of the historic stuff. You go through the house and it's like a museum. He's got all the old stuff laid out. Really cool. This was a house over in Skinny Alice that we replaced the columns on. That one's getting old. That was about 30 years ago we did that one. And we are back to the beginning.
Any other questions? Chris asked about silos, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you reuse silos?
We fixed a couple of wooden silos. When it comes to reusing silos, I've heard stories again of the Amish being industrious and taking them down, putting them back up. Never seen it actually being done. One silo, I launch into these stories and sometimes I probably shouldn't, but we were going around for years taking silos down, a number of them that were in disuse and they were getting bad and the farmers wanted them down. So I got pretty good at it. I could show up in 45 minutes and get a silo on the ground and drop it exactly where you wanted it. So we were doing a bunch of that. I got called out to Fayetteville one day to take down a silo that, the silage was about half full of silage, and the silage had spontaneously combusted, so it was in there burning on a day like today. So they hired me to drop the top half of the silo so the fire department could get at the fire. I did my end of it and had this thing dropped and perfect, and then they continued on, and the fire chief asked us, because we looked like we knew what we were doing, to hang in there with them in case they needed us. And another guy from the company nearby, a gravel pit, came in with a payloader, and he was basically beating up the rest of the silo staves to take it down the rest of the way. And in the process, he went up with a 30-foot tall pile of silage that tipped over and hit a guy. So we got sued for that one, along with the fire department and the gravel pit and the farmer. And that, well, it cost my insurance company about $1 million. And it, honest to God, before it happened, the guys that got hurt, I told them they needed to get out of that area because they're inside a pole building. And I've been around silage my whole life and I understand the dangers of it. If that silage tipped over, the building wasn't going to stop it. So I told them they needed to get out of there. They walked out. Some other chief sent them right back in, and they fell over down. But I haven't really lost much sleep over the things that we did. I thought, I don't know what I would have done different, but these things happen. So the best use I've seen for a silo like that was I took one down on Rhode Island, and they took all of the staves and turned it into a patio for this winery that they were building. That was pretty cool. Yeah. Like they wanted to, you know, keep every piece of the farm that they could and use it somehow. So when I went back there years later, I was like, I remember these. That was pretty neat. But wooden silos, I've straightened a couple of those up. I actually moved one out in Albany. They were building a retirement home next to this farm that was there. And the architect decided that the silo needed to move but had to stay, so we picked it up and moved it about 100 feet and put it on a new foundation.
You're talking about a wood stay silo, not concrete stay.
Yeah, it was a wood stay silo, right? Which was fortunate, the whole thing worked out real well because the bottom 6 inches of it was pretty rotten, so in the process we cut it off and lowered it down and put it back on the good wood.
Was there one type of wood that was used more than others for either the siding of an old barn in this area or the frame?
Well, a lot of hemlock and pine. I would say hemlock is probably predominant.
Treated stuff?
What's that?
Treated?
Treated?
Originally? No.
Oh,
No, they didn't have treated lumber until about 1950. I took down a airplane hangar that was built in 1950 out at the Syracuse airport, and it was the creosote dip treated poles, and they're actually still good. I mean, they're probably better than what the modern treated will do, but you can't mess around with creosote. You know, you hear those stories and you think, oh yeah, you know, some environmentalist, you know, telling you what you can't do, but we were supposed to do a job for a guy in Buffalo, and he'd gotten a hold of 5 gallons of creosote. He went out and was painting his covered bridge that he had, and just got it all over himself, and he was dead 3 days later. Just shut his liver down and killed him. Yeah. So don't mess around with creosote.
Anyway,
awesome.
thank you for coming.
Well, thank you.